From the courts and referendum questions to Corb Lund's anti-coal petition and pressure on the federal government to stand behind its MOU commitments. Time now for tonight's politics panel, and joining us this evening, former Lethbridge Mayor Chris Spearman, and Graham Thomson is a longtime political columnist in the province. Good evening to you both. And let's begin with the government's response to criticism from the courts in the wake of introducing Bill 14.
We noticed a gap and a deficiency in the Citizen Initiative Act that required some amendments to help create the atmosphere for citizens to bring forward important petitions that they think that they want to have Albertans weigh in on, and that was the sort of the crux for the amendment. So certainly wasn't what Justice Feasby thought it was.
In a decision issued Friday, Court of King's Bench Justice Colin Feasby said a separatist referendum question would go against the Charter, First Nations treaty rights, and the province's existing referendum law. It came one day after the government introduced legislation to allow referendum petitions to proceed regardless of whether they violate the Constitution. Justice Feasby says changing the rules midstream undermines democracy and the administration of justice. Chris, the government is calling Bill 14 a reset, needed because the government doesn't want to see the courts delay direct democracy. How do you see that rationale playing?
Well, it's an interesting interpretation. Usually we have a check and balance system in our democracy. You know, the courts play a role, the government plays a role, and now we have politicians saying that they should trump the rulings of an independent court system. So do all Albertans agree with this? So this is, again, like a midterm issue that's been raised. It's not something that was campaigned on at an election. So it's an interesting twist to have the Minister of Justice say, this is the way the world should work now.
Graham, what do you make of how the court has responded, issuing a decision on constitutionality so soon after the introduction of Bill 14?
Yeah, basically what's happened here, the government's been losing this fight. Okay, so you get the courts, you get three parts of government. You get the judicial, the courts, the executive, that's the Premier's office, and the legislative. Smith controls, of course, her office, and she's getting a lot more power in the last couple of years. Since the election, more and more power in her office. She controls the legislature, of course, because of majority government, and the courts were in her way. And so what she's done is change the law when it comes to laws in Alberta, where you get the court saying your own law, you're not following your own law when it comes to referendums. And this was a case where Thomas Lukaszuk, the Forever Canadian group that had 400,000 people sign a petition to basically say, let's stay within Canada. And the other one, the separatist referendum, was having problems in the court, and the court said, this is not constitutional. So what Smith has done is just changed the rules and taken away power from the Alberta's chief electoral officer by saying, you no longer control this, we'll control this, as opposed to the courts deciding this third leg of the government, democracy in Alberta. So the Premier is attacking one of the legs of democracy, the judicial leg, which is really important, of course, for the courts to determine what the law says. And the government says, we don't agree with you, we're going to change the law. And this is happening not just, of course, provincially, but it becomes federal law. She's using the notwithstanding clause against with teachers and trans people in the province. So this is the Premier taking a lot of power into her own hands, bypassing the courts. This should be deeply troubling to Albertans, but there's so much happening right now. It's a fire hose of headlines, and it's difficult for Albertans to understand what is going on. And I would say that is the whole point. Flood the zone. People don't really understand what's going on, and the government can do what it wants by taking more power, grabbing more power, and bypassing a really important aspect of democracy that the Premier wants to attack.
Well, Chris, one more quick one on this. During her radio call-in show on the weekend, Premier Smith indicated anyone seeking an independence referendum should not have gatekeepers like the courts standing in their way. What do you see this spelling moving forward where relations between the government and the courts are concerned?
Well, I think the issue is now that the government can pick and choose which referendums it wants to go forward from here on in. So the ones that favor the government's policies, they will go forward. The ones that don't will be probably turned down. I think that's the exact opposite of democracy.
All right. Well, now, still on the referendum front, Elections Alberta has approved an application for a citizen-led petition against coal mining. Musician and rancher Corb Lund submitted the question last month. It asks that the government of Alberta prohibit any new coal mining activities within the eastern slopes of the Rockies. Lund says he's been fighting against mining activities for the last 5 years. He now has 7 days to appoint a chief financial officer. And the petition would need 177,000 signatures for a referendum to proceed. Graham, do you see this petition having the same kind of momentum politically as the gentleman you mentioned just a moment ago, Thomas Lukaszuk and his Forever Canadian campaign?
Yeah, the Forever Canadian campaign is very clear, and the polls are showing that, of course, Albertans do not want to separate, majority of Albertans, that is. This one, you would think it's very clear as well. But this, of course, is impacting a certain segment of Alberta, a certain geographical area. I would hope that this would generate a lot of attention. The thing is, though, Lukaszuk, former politician, I would say still a politician, he had a lot of people joining him to make this work. And the question is, can Corb Lund actually organize this? A lot of it is just getting people to sign. And this takes a lot of organization. Lukaszuk had a massive amount of people. And it gets to an issue of, a fatigue. Will people sign it? Will he get volunteers to go out there and collect the name? So this is going to be an issue. I think these should people that can understand this issue. I think many of them would probably support what he's talking about. But can he get this thing organized in time? That, to me, is the big question.
Chris, you're kind of in the thick of the area where all of this is a big discussion. Corb Lund has 4 months now to gather nearly 178,000 signatures. How do you see that going? Is there the support he needs to get this through and force the hand of the Smith government?
Well, I'll be honest that the biggest challenge, and I've been involved in the issue myself, is basically educating and informing all Albertans. I think there was a poll done recently, and when the pollsters contacted individual Albertans by phone, 89% of them weren't aware of the issue. Corb is the guy with the profile who can make people aware of the issue, and more people do need to understand what the implications are and understand the arguments on both sides of the coal mining issue. It's economic development versus some of the risks that are happening currently in the Elk Valley in BC and have been documented by the Alberta government's own research reports. Things like how do you remove selenium from the river water? How do you prevent coal dust from spreading in an area that has high intensity Chinook winds? Those are things that would go along with coal mining. And, personally, I've been involved in economic development, but I'm always concerned when any form of economic development impacts the rest of the economy and people's lifestyles. So Corb will have to communicate all of that and get people thinking about those issues and get them to sign his petition.
Graham, one more, yet another petition as things pile on. What do you see mounting against the Smith government? Or at some point, to go back to your fire hose analogy there a moment ago, at some point, does this all just kind of blend into the background?
And this is the problem. There's so much going on right now in Alberta, the politics generated by the UCP government and Smith herself, as usual. So yes, there's a real danger. This does get into the background because, again, when it comes to this particular petition, Corb Lund, I think a lot of Albertans would support what he's talking about. I think a lot of people who support NDP, and also not just the NDP, you got people environmentalists, you got people in that corner of the province who are against what's actually happening, potentially happening when it comes to pollution and an impact on the water. The problem's going to be we're heading into Christmas, and it's a very quiet time of year. People don't want to talk about politics. It's like summer vacation. And this is a problem as well for Corb Lund, just organizing this thing at this time of year after a major petition drive by somebody else on something else.
All right. Time for us to take a bit of a break. But when we come back, following up on our year-end interview with Calgary MP Corey Hogan. More from our politics panel in a moment. Welcome back. We heard from Calgary MP Corey Hogan off the top, Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Energy and Natural Resources. It was a year-end conversation that ended up focusing largely on the federal government's MOU with Alberta and support for a new pipeline to the northwest coast. Chris, what's to be made of pressure now on the Carney government to carry through on the MOU commitment? Is there the messaging that will satisfy Albertans politically?
I think the Carney government just has to do a careful political dance. Basically, you're trying to make sure that you don't inflame the separatists. I think the Poilievre is trying to put the government in a difficult spot. This vote, I don't see it being successful. The NDP are not going to vote for it. The Bloc Québécois is not going to vote for it. And the Liberals, how do they balance what's happening in their party with divisions happening at this point? So how do they stay together? And so they simply label this as a political stunt by the Conservatives and vote against it. I don't see a whole lot of pressure, but they do have to be careful going forward and provide good rationale for voting against something where they just signed the agreement less than 2 weeks ago.
Graham, to pick up on some of those points there, how challenged will the Carney government be in working through its own caucus divisions over the MOU while still fending off these external political pressures like we're seeing with this week's pipeline motion brought forward by Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives?
Yeah, I think there's two things going on here. Of course, Poilievre is hoping to split the Liberals because there is pushback, especially from the Liberal MPs, rather, in British Columbia, who some were actually caught off guard by this memorandum of understanding to build a pipeline. The two things that Hogan talked about, and they're related. One is, he was saying about this government has to be pragmatic. The Liberal government has to be pragmatic, and they're trying to balance between the environment and oil production, the economy, basically. And I think that goes to the point that Carney's not really a Liberal in the conventional sense. He's really a red Tory, a progressive conservative, if you will. And that ties into this idea. The MOU isn't just saying, let's build a pipeline, like that's the wording of the motion from the Conservatives to try and split the Liberals. The MOU is a lot more nuanced, and it puts a lot of two things. It talks about First Nations becoming partners. The motion from the Conservatives just say, now let's build a pipeline, you support a pipeline, and we'll consult with First Nations, whereas the federal government with Alberta is talking about making First Nations actual partners. Another thing is the environment. And you have in the MOU this reliance that Alberta has to make sure this Pathways Alliance deal is done. $16.5 billion idea to sequester carbon emissions from the oil sands. That's to protect the environment. That's not in the motion from the Conservatives. Very simplistic. So I think that Liberals can say, look, the MOU, we support that. Of course, you get members of the caucus who don't, but I don't see them voting against their own government on a motion. I see this, it is a tactic, it's a political ploy to make the Liberals squirm. And I don't see this being successful at all.
Okay, Chris, the Conservatives have been singling out Corey Hogan this week in driving their pipeline motion forward. What do you make of how this rookie MP is handling the pressure?
Well, I think he's doing a pretty good job as a rookie MP. He's fairly young, but also fairly experienced in politics. He's hosted podcasts and discussed issues for years. So I think the fact that he is playing an important role in the energy portfolio tells you that the Prime Minister has a lot of confidence in Corey Hogan.
And on that point, Graham, as the lone Liberal MP from Calgary, what kind of weight is resting on Corey Hogan's shoulders as all this MOU pipeline dialogue plays out?
Well, the thing is, Alberta government signed this. You get the Premier of Alberta who's been attacking the Liberals, from day one, even before she became Premier, of course, going back to her days years ago in politics. And she's actually signed on to the MOU and saying this is good. And, she got booed at her own convention, which was talking about, hey, maybe Canada is starting to work. So I think that Corey Hogan, the balance here, he's working a balance, but so is Danielle Smith. And right now they both agree the MOU is a good idea. The question is, will it get a pipeline built? And I got to say, I'm a skeptic when it comes to that because of things like getting the Pathways Alliance $16.5 billion idea, make that go ahead. That will require likely government help. And this is another tricky issue for Smith. She's got to do that. She's got to make that thing work to get the pipeline built. So she's walking a tight line. So is Corey Hogan. And the question is, how will this all work out? And I got to say, it's a cliche, but time will tell.
Time will tell. The clock is ticking. All right. Gentlemen, we're way over time. We have to leave it there. Great to see you both. Thank you.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Graham.